17,630 days. That is how long one man in Mississippi waited for his final day. Longer than many people live. Before closing his eyes for the last time, he whispered 3 words. "I deeply regret it." Another simply said, "No comment," and one quoted an old American folk song as if singing himself into the unknown. These are names that once shook Mississippi, people whose pasts left scars so deep not even time or death could fully erase them. But this story isn't just about what happened. It continues through final meals, some oddly extravagant, others unsettling in their simplicity, and final words, where justice is no longer clear-cut. Before we begin, leave a comment. Which country or state are you watching from? Let's see how far these stories have traveled. Are you ready? Because this journey is one you won't be able to look away from. First, Thomas Edwin Loden, Jr., June 22, 2000. It was a sweltering day in Mississippi. The sun bore down on a remote country road near Moselle, where only a few cars passed each hour. It was nearly 10 at night, when 16-year-old Lisa Gray finished her shift at Dairy Cream and started driving home. But her small Mazda broke down. She didn't know that fate had been quietly waiting by the roadside. A man pulled over and stepped out. He looked polite, wore a U.S. Marine uniform, badges pinned to his chest, and a soft, reassuring smile. Thomas Edwin Loden, Jr., 36, had served in Okinawa and was known as a dedicated military instructor. He calmly offered help. Lisa nodded. She trusted him. It was a moment she would never take back. She never made it home that night. Hours later, a family's world would begin to fall apart. When Loden was found, he didn't deny what he had done. Inside his vehicle, police discovered a cassette tape that began with a whispered confession. "I'm sorry. I don't know what I was thinking." He had been found unconscious with injuries on his wrists, lying beside a 12-page handwritten letter addressed to Lisa's family. He was sentenced not long after, and for years he hardly fought the ruling, at times even asking for it to be carried out. But time passed. 22 years inside a solitary cell at Parchman changed the story. The letters of apology became legal appeals. He pointed to past trauma, an abusive childhood, and his long struggle with what he called the burden of forgiveness. By 2022, Mississippi had reinstated the use of lethal injection. Loden became the first person in nearly a decade scheduled for the procedure. On December 14th, with cameras rolling and Lisa's loved ones present, Loden chose his final meal: 2 fried pork chops, fried okra, roasted sweet potatoes with butter, Pillsbury Grand's biscuits with molasses, peach cobbler with French vanilla ice cream, and a glass of sweet Lipton tea. When asked for final words, he looked directly at Lisa's family and said, "I deeply regret it. I committed a terrible act. Please forgive me." At 6:12 in the evening, the procedure began. 13 minutes later, the former Marine lay still. His 22-year reckoning came to a quiet end. In a journal found afterward, he had written, "I took away a light from this world, and I will carry that darkness until my final breath." Thomas Edwin Loden, Jr., once decorated, once trusted, stayed silent for almost 2 decades. Then, in the end, spoke 3 words. But the question remains, can "I deeply regret it" ever undo a moment that changed so many lives? Or are some apologies simply too late? Second, Earl Wesley Berry, November 29, 1987. After choir practice at First Baptist Church in Houston, Mississippi, Mary Bounds, a kind and welcoming woman devoted to her congregation, stepped out under the soft glow of street lamps. She had no idea this would be her fateful night. Just a few steps away stood Earl Wesley Berry, 28. He had been diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia, had an IQ around 70, and had attempted suicide several times, requiring multiple psychiatric hospital stays. He parked on the shoulder under dim light and waited. He was not there to offer comfort. He planned to abduct Mary. She was forced into his vehicle. Berry later admitted he may have intended more but stopped after a few chaotic moments. He assaulted her during a brief but traumatic encounter. Mary was later found deceased near her vehicle. An earring and a single shoe lay in the roadside grass. Barry fled to his grandmother's house, burned his clothes, and tossed the blood-stained handkerchief into a pond. He was arrested on December 6, 1987, after his brother reported him. Police recovered the shoe and handkerchief as evidence. In Chickasaw County Court, he was swiftly convicted of kidnapping and capital murder, and sentenced to death on October 28, 1988. The verdict was upheld again in a retrial in 1992, following U.S. legal procedure, even amid questions about his mental illness. When Barry was arrested, he did not deny his crimes. He was sentenced in October 1988, a sentence reaffirmed in June 1992. In the years that followed, human rights groups raised concerns about his mental health. He had been hospitalized for schizophrenia and did not know how to tie shoelaces until age 7. But all appeals stalled. In October 2007, the U.S. Supreme Court reviewed whether he was mentally competent for execution, but ultimately the sentence was upheld. Then came May 21, 2008. Mississippi moved forward. Barry, wearing a red shirt and white trousers, faced his final moments. He chose his last meal: BBQ pork ribs, sausage, buttered toast, onion salad, mashed potatoes with gravy, pecan pie, and fruit juice. He also took a Valium pill to calm himself. When asked if he felt remorse, Barry quietly said, "No, I've done 21 years, that's enough." At 6:15 in the evening, the first injection was administered. He lay still. Mary's family, watching, broke down in tears. Her mother, Dottie Poge, later said, "Justice has just now been brought to bear. I can sleep a little better." Third, John B. Nixon Sr. January 22, 1985. It was a cold night in Rankin County, Mississippi. Virginia Tucker, 45, had just finished a night shift at a local pharmacy and was driving home on a quiet road. Soon, a Ford van pulled over. From the shadows stepped John B. Nixon Sr., a World War II veteran and auto mechanic, accompanied by 2 other men. They knocked on her door just as she was entering. Nixon held a .22 caliber firearm and said softly, "I brought a gift for you." When Virginia moved, he attacked her fatally. Her husband, Thomas Tucker, was injured but managed to escape and alerted nearby colleagues. Police later determined it was a murder for hire. Virginia was killed for a $1,000 life insurance policy. It had been arranged by her ex-husband, Elster Joseph Pontieu. Nixon was arrested on November 4, 1985, after Thomas Tucker identified him in a lineup. 2 accomplices, including Nixon's son, were also arrested later. The crime van was found in Texas. Nixon was convicted of murder for hire and sentenced to death in March 1986. The sentence was upheld through each appeal. When arrested on November 4th, he did not deny the charges. He looked directly ahead and accepted them. Many believed he had acted to help his son. In March 1986, the death sentence was confirmed. Despite multiple appeals, none delayed execution. On December 14, 2005, Mississippi resumed executions after a long pause. Nixon, then 77, became the oldest person executed in modern U.S. history. That morning, he opted for a light breakfast of eggs, sausage, toast, and coffee, and skipped lunch in preparation for his final meal. For his last meal, he chose a Southern favorite: a well-done T-bone steak, buttery asparagus, baked potato with sour cream, peach cobbler with French vanilla ice cream, followed by a glass of sweet tea. Before he was led to the death chamber, Nixon softly quoted from an old folk song, "Katie Cruel." "Oh, that I was where I would be. Here am I, where I must be." He then turned to witnesses and said in a calm voice, "I did not kill Virginia Tucker. In my heart, she was like a child to me, a Spanish friend, and another man from Jackson." At the final moment, he looked around and said, "Friends, I pray for everybody." At 6:25 in the evening, the injection began. He lay still. Parchman Prison witnessed the fall of a man who once wore a uniform and protected his country, now still as the sentence was finally carried out. Fourth, Gary Carl Simmons, Jr., August 1996, Mississippi. The air was thick with humidity rising from the Pascagoula swamps where mist lingered on the highway and insects buzzed between dark pine trees. In a suburban home in Jackson County, Gary Carl Simmons, Jr., 33 years old, a butcher and small-time drug dealer, was waiting. His eyes fixed on the clock. It was time to settle a score. Jeffrey Wolf, a drug dealer from Texas, had come to Mississippi to collect a debt, nearly $20,000. But instead of getting paid, Wolf walked into a deadly trap. Simmons and his brother-in-law, Timothy Milano, ambushed him. He restrained Wolf and fatally injured him with a firearm. It didn't end there. Simmons dragged Wolf's girlfriend into a walk-in freezer behind the house. For hours, she was threatened in ways that left her in absolute terror. He left her there, then went back inside. What happened next became one of the most disturbing cases in Mississippi history. Gary Simmons disposed of Wolf's remains in a remote swamp area. Nearly 60 bone fragments were recovered days later. The media soon called it the alligator dismemberment case. Simmons was arrested shortly afterward. At his trial in 1997, he showed no remorse. He was convicted of capital murder, kidnapping, and sexual assault, and sentenced to death. Despite numerous appeals, the outcome never changed. The verdict was upheld at every level, including the United States Supreme Court. On June 20, 2012, after 15 years on death row, Mississippi set the date for his execution at Parchman Prison. That afternoon, Gary Simmons requested one of the largest last meals in state history. A large Super Supreme pizza, another 3-cheese pizza, 8 packs of Parmesan, 8 packs of ranch dressing, a bag of Doritos, a large order of fries from McDonald's, 40 slices of jalapenos, 8 ounces of jalapeno cheese sauce, 2 strawberry milkshakes, 2 bottles of cherry Coke, and 2 containers of strawberry ice cream. A strange feast for a final night. Before the execution, Simmons declined sedatives and kept eating what was left of his meal. As he entered the chamber, he quietly said to the officials, "I've made peace with God. I do feel remorse." At 6:16 in the evening, the final injection was administered. His body slowly became still. No words, no crying, just silence. Gary Carl Simmons, Jr. Once a butcher, then a man who dragged others into a nightmare, ended his life in a cold execution chamber after a bloated meal and a late confession. But can making peace with God ever erase the memory of dozens of body parts left in the swamp? Or the haunting echoes still felt by the living? 5th, David Neal Cox, May 2010, Mississippi. Kim Kirk Cox, a 40-year-old mother of 3, walked into a small house in Sherman to visit her ex-husband, David Neal Cox. She didn't know that this would be the last time she saw the world as a free woman. David, a man with a criminal history including drug possession and charges involving minors, had recently been released from prison, but instead of rebuilding his life, he had been planning revenge. Years of rejection had turned into rage. That night, he harmed Kim in front of their children, ending her life. Before doing so, he forced her to call her family, to say goodbye. Kim pleaded for her life, but David did not let her go. Police surrounded the house for hours. Eventually, David surrendered and was taken to Lee County Jail. For the next 11 years, he never filed an appeal. Instead, in 2021, Cox requested to be executed, calling himself a volunteer for death row. He claimed he wanted to end the suffering for everyone involved and said he didn't want to waste taxpayer money. But before his execution, David made one final chilling confession. He admitted to killing his sister-in-law, Felicia Cox, back in 2007, and revealed the location of her body. He wrote a letter with directions. In 2022, her remains were recovered, confirming everything he had said. November 17, 2021. At Parchman Prison, David Neal Cox became the first person executed in Mississippi in over 9 years. His final meal was simple: fried catfish, cornbread, French fries, and banana pudding. A Southern meal, plain and familiar, and cold. When asked for any last words, Cox said calmly, "I want my children to know I love them very much. I used to be a good man, and never read anything other than the King James Bible." He also thanked the prison warden for treating him with kindness in his final days. At 6:12 in the evening, the lethal injection was administered. David's body slowly went still, the ceiling lights reflecting off his indifferent eyes. There was no struggle, no tears. 14 minutes later, he was declared dead, ending a cycle of violence that had lasted over a decade. David Neal Cox, a man who took his ex-wife's life, confessed to a second killing, and chose to walk toward the needle himself, left behind a disturbing question. Does every person deserve the right to end their story on their own terms? 6th, Richard Gerald Jordan, January 1976, Mississippi. A damp winter settled over the red dirt roads of Gulfport. The sky was gray. The scent of pine still lingered in the air from Christmas fires. In a quiet neighborhood, Edwina Martyr, 35 years old and a mother of 2, was preparing dinner when someone rang the doorbell. The man said he was from the power company, needing to check the meter. Without hesitation, she opened the door. Trust, simple and fragile. That man was Richard Gerald Jordan, 29 years old. He wasn't a utility worker. He didn't carry tools, only a firearm and a cold, calculated plan. He forced Edwina into a car and drove through winding country roads, heading into the DeSoto National Forest, where even the birds had gone silent. There, in a moment of stillness among the trees, he pulled the trigger. Her body was left beneath fallen leaves, as if the forest itself was covering the truth. A few hours later, he called her husband, demanding $25,000 in ransom, a plan that had never been about rescue, only about gain. Jordan was arrested the next day when his taxi drove past a police checkpoint. Inside the car, officers found a gun, maps, and notes labeled Plan A. In court, Jordan did not deny the crime. His lawyer argued mental instability and financial desperation. The court disagreed. In 1976, Mississippi sentenced him to death. Over the next 48 years, Jordan would face 4 separate trials, each one adding another layer of darkness to his time on death row. He became the longest-serving death row inmate in Mississippi history. A man kept alive, but out of reach, where time did not forgive. For nearly half a century, Jordan remained in solitary confinement at Parchman. He was once assigned trustee duties for good behavior. No rule violations, no disruptions. He read books, wrote letters, and filed appeal after appeal. In a 2017 hearing, Jordan argued that he had been denied his own psychiatric expert, a violation of constitutional rights. Later, when Mississippi switched to midazolam, a sedative criticized for causing pain, Jordan called it legal torture. But time was running out. In June of 2025, Mississippi courts announced the execution would proceed. On June 25th, the syringe would be prepared. And Jordan would become the oldest person executed in the state since the 1940s. No one yet knows what he'll choose for his final meal. No one knows what he'll say, if anything at all. So, what was 48 years in solitary? A punishment, or a slow death disguised as justice? 7th, Robert Simon Jr., February 1990, Mississippi. It was a winter night. Fog clung to the windshield, and the road into rural Quitman County disappeared into gray. The Parker family, Carl, Bobby Joe, and their 2 young children, had just left a Bible study, heading home, unaware that the house they were returning to would never be a place of peace again. Waiting in the shadows were Robert Simon Jr., 25, and Anthony Carr. They carried deep resentment, and a plan forged in hatred. As the family stepped inside, the 2 men broke in and took control, one by one. What happened in that small house, over hours of silence and fire, left a scar on Mississippi's criminal history. By morning, police arrived to a home engulfed in black smoke. Inside, among the ashes, were the remains of an entire family. Toy cars lay in the dust, a painful reminder of a home destroyed. The family's vehicle was missing. But even as the killers believed the flames had erased their traces, investigators quickly uncovered clues. Simon and Carr were arrested the very next day. The stolen car had been abandoned, with blood and belongings still inside. A firearm was found in the trunk. At the station, Simon gave a chilling statement. "I'm not sure what I did. It felt like I was sleepwalking through a nightmare." In 1990, the court sentenced Simon to 3 death penalties and 1 life sentence. But that was only the beginning of a legal battle spanning more than 3 decades. Simon appealed again and again, citing brain trauma, memory loss, and earlier diagnoses of head injuries. In 2011, Mississippi delayed the execution to reevaluate his mental fitness, but experts concluded he had faked memory loss. To this day, Robert Simon Jr. remains on death row at Parchman. Each letter from his lawyers buys him time. Each court decision gives him another day. Now, his case, full of arguments, appeals, and pleas, sits with the Mississippi Supreme Court, which may issue a final ruling. It's been more than 30 years, but that house has never seen light again. Justice still waits. Or perhaps it is just a shadow, trembling in the memory of the living. 8. Charles Ray Crawford, April 1993, Mississippi. Evening settled over Tippah County. Wind swept through cedar trees, unaware that tragedy was just moments away. Christy Ray, 20 years old, a hard-working college student and the pride of her parents, had just left the bank where she worked part-time. A country song played softly on the radio as she drove, unaware of the danger lurking nearby, and of the eyes watching her from the shadows. Charles Ray Crawford, a man with a prior conviction for assault, had recently been released on bond while awaiting trial for another case. He wasn't a stranger. He had once lived in town and seemed polite. But that night, the mask came off. Christy was abducted and later found deceased. Her body was found near a cemetery in a quiet, rural area. In her coat pocket, police discovered a crumpled ransom note, warning not to call law enforcement. But it was too late. Her family never had the chance to respond. Crawford was arrested just days later. He personally led police back to the scene. During the May 1994 trial, no one in the courtroom forgot the moment Christy's mother stood, trembling, and read a letter to her daughter. The room fell silent. The jury sentenced Crawford to death, but what followed was a nearly 30-year legal maze. Crawford cited brain damage, epilepsy, and memory loss, claiming he had no clear recollection of the crime. But forensic evidence, his organized behavior, and post-arrest confession left little doubt. All appeals were denied. In 2014, the United States Supreme Court declined to review the case. Then, in June of 2025, Mississippi moved to end the legal spiral. The state's Attorney General asked the Mississippi Supreme Court to set an execution date within 30 days. As of now, Charles Ray Crawford remains on death row at Parchman Prison. No one knows what he'll request for his final meal. No one has heard his final words, if there are any. But Christy's family, who light a candle each year on the day she was taken, said this during a recent hearing. "We're not seeking revenge. We just want to know that justice still exists, and that our daughter, Christy, didn't die in silence." 9th. Willie Jerome Manning. December 11, 1992, Mississippi. Cold wind swept across the campus of Mississippi State University. The lights from Sigma Chi glowed faintly in the distance as Tiffany Miller, 22, and John Steckler, 19, both standout students, left an evening gathering and began driving back to their dorm. They didn't know someone was watching. Willie Jerome Manning, 26, lived nearby. He had a criminal history, including theft. According to investigators, Manning ambushed the couple on a quiet stretch of road, forcing them out of their car. John was attacked and left behind. Tiffany was taken elsewhere. The next morning, her body was found near a trail a few miles from campus. Police later discovered the stolen Honda Accord. Manning was seen driving it shortly after the incident. Weapons and hair samples found inside the car became central to the case, but soon the case began to unravel. The FBI later admitted that their hair analysis did not meet modern reliability standards. The key witness, a fellow inmate, claimed Manning had confessed in jail, but that testimony was later called into question, lacking supporting evidence. Manning maintained his innocence. Organizations like the Innocence Project stepped in, calling for DNA testing. In 2013, just hours before the scheduled execution, Manning received a stay, one of the most debated cases in Mississippi's recent history. His first trial in 1994 had ended in a death sentence, a decision shaped by weak evidence and questionable witnesses. In 1996, he received a second conviction, but it was later overturned in 2015 when DNA disproved the original claims and witnesses admitted to being coerced. Then, in 2013, only 4 hours before the execution, the Mississippi Supreme Court issued a last-minute stay, after forensic reports from the FBI showed serious flaws. Since then, Manning has continued to seek DNA testing, but his requests were repeatedly denied. Only in late 2023, when the main witness recanted their testimony, did the court finally pause the case again, a faint light at the end of a long tunnel. 31 years on death row, with no execution and a verdict still under scrutiny. If justice is meant to bring clarity, why has one man remained in the shadows for so long? 10th, Lisa Jo Chamberlain, March 19, 2004, Mississippi. In the misty woods of Hattiesburg, the night was quiet. Vernon Hewlett and Linda Heinzelman, a quiet couple, had just moved out of the house they once shared with Roger Gillett and his girlfriend, Lisa Jo Chamberlain. They left because of tension, unspoken conflicts, unaware that their departure would be the last time anyone saw them alive. Lisa, then 31, had grown up with emotional scars, a father who drank, a distant stepmother, and a teacher who had left lasting harm. Her life was spent in a gray zone of morality. When she met Roger, a man with a criminal past, she found connection, but also sank into dangerous dependence. Roger was said to be the mastermind. He believed Vernon and Linda posed a threat to his relationship with Lisa and might report illegal activity happening in the home. Lisa didn't object. She became an active accomplice. That night, according to investigators, the two of them ended Vernon and Linda's lives inside the house, a decision meant to protect secrets. The remains were transported to a remote farm location in Kansas where Lisa and Roger had once lived briefly. The truth began to surface when an old friend overheard Lisa mention fragments of the story over the phone, just enough to piece together a buried nightmare. Police arrested both Lisa and Roger on March 29th in Kansas using DNA evidence and phone records. During the 2006 trial, Lisa admitted her role, helping to restrain Linda, but pointed to Roger's controlling behavior and structured planning. Still, the jury didn't waver. On August 4, 2006, Lisa Jo Chamberlain was sentenced to death for 2 counts of capital murder. Lisa didn't remain silent. She filed appeals in 2008 and 2010. Hope flickered when a federal court raised concerns about jury bias, but in 2018, her death sentence was upheld. By May of 2025, Mississippi ruled there wasn't enough new evidence to change the outcome. If carried out, Lisa would be the first woman executed in Mississippi in over 80 years. A moment that would not only close a legal chapter, but also raise the question, where's the line between pain, participation, and justice? 10 sentences, 10 stories, each one with a different ending, a different guilt, and a different walk toward the death chamber. But beyond legal debates and moral reckoning, there remains a quiet pain, the kind that never fades. Families of the victims still live each day with a space that can never be filled. No last meal, no final words, just memories that smolder in old rooms, lullabies that never finished, laughter that never returned. So when justice takes a life, does it ever truly heal what's left behind? Or, sometimes, is the harshest sentence not for those who committed the crime, but for those who must keep living after? If you'd like to explore more haunting stories from death row across America, hit like, subscribe to the channel, and check out our full series, Voices from Death Row. See you in the next video.